I raised my son alone after being abandoned. At his graduation, he gave me a coffin miniature and a note. Happiness starts when you're gone. I walked away. The next day, a call came, and his hands began to tremble. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I got to that moment, standing in that auditorium, holding a tiny wooden coffin while my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. 25 years ago, I was Margaret Thompson, a young wife who thought she had it all figured out. My husband David and I had just welcomed our son Daniel into the world. I remember holding that tiny baby in my arms, thinking about all the dreams we had for him. David used to joke that Daniel would be a doctor or a lawyer, something important that would make us proud. 3 years later, David decided our little family wasn't worth staying for. I came home from my shift at the diner to find a note on the kitchen table and his wedding ring beside it. "I can't do this anymore," it said. "Take care of Daniel." Just like that, he was gone, leaving me with a toddler, a mountain of bills, and no idea how I was going to survive.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
But I did survive. I had to. Daniel was my everything, my reason to keep going when the world felt impossible. I worked double shifts at the diner, cleaned houses on weekends, and took in ironing at night after Daniel went to bed. My hands were always rough, my back always ached, but seeing Daniel smile made it all worthwhile. He was such a bright child, always curious, always asking questions. I made sure he had everything he needed for school, even if it meant I went without. When other kids had name-brand sneakers, I found ways to get them for Daniel, even if it meant eating peanut butter sandwiches for a week. When he wanted to join the science club and needed money for supplies, I picked up extra shifts and made it happen. Daniel excelled in school. His teachers always told me how smart he was, how much potential he had. I was so proud. I kept every report card, every certificate, every drawing he made me. My refrigerator was covered with his achievements, and I would point them out to anyone who visited. High school was harder financially. Daniel wanted to take advanced placement classes that required expensive textbooks and materials. He talked about wanting to study medicine, about becoming a doctor. The guidance counselor told me that with his grades, he could get into a good college, maybe even get scholarships. I knew I had to make it happen, no matter what it cost. I took on a third job, working at a convenience store from midnight to 6 in the morning after my shifts at the diner and cleaning houses. I barely slept, but Daniel never knew. I made sure he had everything he needed, that he never felt the weight of our financial struggles. When Daniel got accepted to State University with a partial scholarship, I was over the moon. The remaining costs were still significant, but I was determined. I sold my mother's jewelry, the only valuable things I had left. I took out loans, worked extra hours, and somehow made it work. During his college years, Daniel started changing. He called less frequently, visited even less. When he did come home, he seemed embarrassed by our small apartment, by my worn furniture and secondhand clothes. He started making comments about improving himself and rising above his circumstances. I told myself it was normal, that he was just growing up, finding his place in the world. But deep down, I knew something was shifting. The way he looked at me, the way he introduced me to his friends when they occasionally met, there was something different, something that made my heart ache in ways I couldn't quite name. Medical school was even more expensive, but Daniel's grades were excellent. He got into a prestigious program, and I was bursting with pride. This was what we had worked for, what all those sleepless nights and aching muscles were for. My son was going to be a doctor. I worked even harder those 4 years. My body was breaking down from the constant labor, but I pushed through. Every time Daniel needed money for books, equipment, or living expenses, I found a way. I never told him about the times I chose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries, or about the nights I fell asleep in my work uniform because I was too exhausted to change. 2 years into medical school, Daniel started dating Victoria. She came from a wealthy family. Her father was a surgeon, her mother involved in high society charity work. The first time Daniel brought her home, I could see the shock in her eyes as she took in our modest apartment. She was polite enough, but there was something in the way she looked at everything, at me, that made me uncomfortable. After that visit, Daniel's behavior toward me became even more distant. Our phone conversations grew shorter. He made excuses about being too busy to visit. When I asked about Victoria, He would change the subject or give me vague answers. I tried not to take it personally. I told myself he was just busy with school, that young men naturally pull away from their mothers as they mature. But it hurt. After everything we had been through together, all the sacrifices I had made, I felt like I was becoming a stranger to my own son. The months leading up to his graduation were particularly difficult. Daniel barely called, and when he did, he seemed irritated, like talking to me was a chore. I convinced myself that once he graduated, once the pressure of medical school was behind him, things would go back to normal between us. I was so excited about his graduation. My son, my baby, was going to be a doctor. I had dreamed of this moment for years, had worked myself to exhaustion to make it possible. I bought a new dress for the occasion. Nothing fancy, but it was the nicest thing I had owned in years. I got my hair done at a salon for the first time and I couldn't remember how long. The morning of graduation, I was nervous, but thrilled. I looked at myself in the mirror and thought about how proud Daniel would be to have me there, to have me see him receive his diploma. After all we had been through, all the struggles and sacrifices, this was our moment of triumph. I drove the 3 hours to the university, my hands shaking with excitement. The auditorium was packed with proud families, everyone dressed in their finest clothes, taking pictures and celebrating. I found my seat and watched as the graduates filed in wearing their caps and gowns. When I spotted Daniel in the crowd, my heart swelled with pride. He looked so handsome, so accomplished. This was the little boy I had raised, the child I had sacrificed everything for, now a doctor. I started to tear up just thinking about it. The ceremony was beautiful. When they called Daniel's name and he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, I clapped until my hands hurt. I was probably the proudest person in that entire auditorium. After the ceremony, families gathered outside to congratulate their graduates and take pictures. I made my way through the crowd, looking for Daniel. When I found him, he was standing with Victoria and her parents. They were all dressed expensively, looking like they belonged in a magazine. "Daniel," I called out, approaching them with a huge smile on my face. He turned, and for just a moment I saw something flash in his eyes. Was it embarrassment? Annoyance? Before I could process it fully, he was walking toward me. "Mom," he said, his voice flat. "I'm so proud of you, honey," I said, reaching out to hug him. He allowed the hug, but didn't return it with any warmth. Over his shoulder I could see Victoria watching us, her expression unreadable. "I have something for you," Daniel said, pulling away from the hug. My heart leaped. A gift. Maybe he had been planning something special. Maybe this distance I had felt was all in my imagination. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. It was beautifully carved, and for a moment, I thought it might be jewelry or something sentimental. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, taking the box with trembling hands. As I opened it, I saw what was inside. A miniature wooden coffin, perfectly crafted, sitting on a bed of black velvet. My breath caught in my throat. "There's a note," Daniel said quietly. With shaking fingers, I unfolded the small piece of paper tucked beside the coffin. In Daniel's handwriting, it read, "Happiness starts when you're gone." The world went silent around me. I could see Daniel's mouth moving, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. The box felt impossibly heavy in my hands. I looked up at him, searching his face for some sign that this was a cruel joke, that my son couldn't possibly mean what this gift implied. But his eyes were cold, almost hateful. Behind him, Victoria was smiling. I don't remember how I got back to my car. The 3-hour drive home passed in a blur of tears and disbelief. I kept the wooden box on the passenger seat, glancing at it every few miles as if it might have transformed into something else, something that made sense. But it remained what it was, a tiny coffin with a message that cut deeper than any physical wound ever could. When I finally reached my apartment, I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, unable to move. The reality of what had happened kept washing over me in waves. My son, the child I had poured my entire life into, had just told me he would be happier if I were dead. Inside my small living room, I placed the box on the coffee table and stared at it. The craftsmanship was beautiful. Daniel must have spent considerable time and money having it made. That somehow made it worse. This wasn't a moment of anger or a cruel impulse. This was planned, deliberate, calculated. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet door. On the top shelf was a cardboard box I hadn't touched in years. With shaking hands, I pulled it down and carried it to the living room. Inside were the remnants of Daniel's childhood: report cards, drawings, photographs, certificates, and awards. The first thing I pulled out was his kindergarten graduation picture. Daniel was missing his 2 front teeth, grinning widely in his little cap and gown. I had worked a double shift that day to afford the cap and gown rental, but I was there in the front row, cheering louder than anyone else. Next was a Mother's Day card he had made in 2nd grade. The construction paper was faded now, but I could still make out his careful 7-year-old handwriting. "My mom is the best mom in the world because she works hard and loves me very much." He had drawn a picture of us holding hands, both of us smiling under a bright yellow sun. I found his 8th grade science fair certificate, first place for his project on renewable energy. I had helped him research at the library because we didn't have internet at home. We spent weeks building the presentation board together at the kitchen table, and when he won, he had hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. There was his high school acceptance letter to the National Honor Society. I remembered how excited he was when it arrived, how we celebrated with ice cream sundaes because it was all I could afford. He had told me that night that he wanted to make me proud, that he was going to become someone important so I wouldn't have to work so hard anymore. Each memory was like a knife twist in an already bleeding wound. Where had I gone wrong? When had the little boy who drew pictures of us together become the man who wished I were dead? I thought about Victoria, and how everything had changed after she entered Daniel's life. The first time he brought her home, she had looked around our apartment with barely concealed disgust. I had tried so hard to make a good impression, had spent money I didn't have on ingredients for a nice dinner. But nothing I did seemed good enough for her standards. I remembered overhearing part of a phone conversation between Daniel and Victoria a few months ago. I had come home early from work and heard him talking in his old bedroom. "I know it's not ideal," he was saying, "but she sacrificed everything for me. I can't just cut her off completely." There was a pause, then, "I understand what you're saying. After graduation, things will be different." At the time, I had convinced myself I was mishearing or misinterpreting. Daniel loved me. He was grateful for everything I had done. But now, holding that tiny coffin in my hands, I realized Victoria had been working on him, poisoning him against me, making him ashamed of where he came from. The phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. For a wild moment, I hoped it might be Daniel calling to apologize, to explain that it had all been some horrible misunderstanding. But when I looked at the caller ID, it was my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. "Margaret, honey, are you all right?" she asked when I answered. "I saw you come home earlier and you looked upset." Mrs. Patterson was in her 70s, a widow who had become something of a surrogate mother to me over the years. She was the closest thing I had to family besides Daniel. "I'm fine," I lied, my voice cracking. "No, you're not. I'm coming over." Before I could protest, she had hung up. 5 minutes later, she was knocking on my door with a plate of cookies and a concerned expression. "What happened at Daniel's graduation?" she asked, settling into the chair across from me. I couldn't bring myself to show her the box or explain what Daniel had done. Instead, I just said, "He's changed, Mrs. Patterson. I don't think he wants me in his life anymore." She studied my face carefully. "That girlfriend of his?" I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Mrs. Patterson had met Victoria once, briefly, when Daniel had stopped by to pick up some things he had left in storage. Even from that short interaction, she had formed an opinion. "Some people," she said slowly, "are so insecure about their own worth that they have to tear down everyone around them to feel better about themselves. And some people are so desperate to belong somewhere that they'll sacrifice anything, even the people who love them most." Her words hit too close to home. I started crying then, really crying. For the first time since leaving the graduation ceremony, Mrs. Patterson moved to sit beside me on the couch, wrapping her arms around me like I was her own daughter. 25 years, I sobbed into her shoulder. 25 years I gave him everything. I worked myself sick to pay for his education. I went without so he could have. And this is what I get? "Oh, honey," she whispered, stroking my hair. "I know it hurts, but sometimes people have to lose something precious before they realize what they had." After Mrs. Patterson left, I sat alone with my memories and my pain. I thought about all the dreams I had given up for Daniel. There had been men who wanted to date me over the years, but I had always put Daniel first. There had been opportunities for advancement at work, but I couldn't take them because they would have required time away from him. I had defined myself entirely by being Daniel's mother. It was my identity, my purpose, the thing that gave my life meaning. And now he was telling me that my existence was a burden to him. I picked up the graduation program that I had clutched throughout the ceremony. Daniel's name was listed with the other graduates. Daniel David Thompson, Doctor of Medicine. No mention of the woman who had made it all possible. No acknowledgement of the sacrifices that had brought him to that stage. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's cold expression, Victoria's satisfied smile, the tiny coffin sitting in its velvet nest. I kept waiting for the phone to ring, for Daniel to call and explain that it had all been some terrible mistake or misguided joke. But the call never came. The next morning, I went to work at the diner as usual. I had been working there for over 20 years, and my coworkers were like family. When Sandra, the other morning waitress, asked how the graduation went, I just smiled and said it was wonderful. I couldn't bear to tell anyone the truth yet, but as the day wore on, the weight of what had happened became harder to carry. Every time someone mentioned their children or asked about Daniel, I felt like I was going to break apart. During my lunch break, I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried until there were no tears left. I thought about calling Daniel, demanding an explanation, begging him to tell me what I had done wrong. But something stopped me. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the dawning realization that if my son could be so cruel, so heartless, then perhaps I didn't know him at all. Instead, I drove to the cemetery where my mother was buried. I hadn't been there in months, too busy working and worrying about Daniel's education expenses. I knelt beside her headstone and told her everything that had happened. "I don't know what to do, Mama," I whispered. "I gave him everything, and he wishes I were dead. How did I fail so completely?" The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, I could almost hear my mother's voice telling me that I hadn't failed, that some people just choose to be ungrateful, that I deserved better than what I was getting. But even that small comfort felt hollow. Because at the end of the day, I was going home to an empty apartment, with nothing to show for 25 years of sacrifice except a tiny coffin and a broken heart. 3 days passed without a word from Daniel. 3 days of me jumping every time the phone rang, hoping it would be him with an apology, an explanation, anything that would make sense of what had happened at his graduation. But the calls that came were from telemarketers, Mrs. Patterson checking on me, and Sandra from the diner asking if I could pick up an extra shift. Never Daniel. On the 4th morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. The fog of shock and disbelief that had surrounded me since graduation was lifting, replaced by something harder to define. It wasn't anger exactly, though there was some of that. It wasn't acceptance either. It was more like a cold understanding that I had been living in a fantasy, believing in a relationship that maybe had never really existed. I made coffee and sat at my small kitchen table, looking at the pile of bills I had been ignoring. Among them was a statement from the student loan company, Daniel's medical school loans that I had co-signed. $28,000 still owed, with my name on them as much as his. He was supposed to start making payments now that he had graduated, but seeing those papers made me realize how intertwined our lives still were. Whether he wanted me in his life or not, the irony wasn't lost on me. He wished I were gone, but he still needed my financial backing. That afternoon, Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door again. This time, she didn't come with cookies. She came with determination and a look I recognized from when she used to manage the church volunteer program. "Margaret, I've been thinking," she said, settling into her usual chair. "You haven't told me what really happened at that graduation, but I can see it's eating you alive. You need to talk about it." I had been holding it in for days, carrying the weight of Daniel's cruelty alone. But looking at Mrs. Patterson's kind, weathered face, I felt the walls I had built around the pain begin to crumble. "He gave me a gift," I said quietly. "What kind of gift?" I went to the coffee table where the wooden box still sat, exactly where I had placed it 4 days ago. I hadn't been able to bring myself to move it or put it away. Mrs. Patterson opened it carefully, her expression puzzled at first, then horrified as she read the note. "Dear Lord in heaven," she whispered. "He gave this to you? At his graduation?" I nodded, unable to speak. Mrs. Patterson closed the box with shaking hands. "Margaret, this is beyond cruel. This is sick. I keep trying to understand what I did wrong," I said. I replay every conversation, every interaction. Was I too clingy? Too protective? Did I embarrass him somehow? "Stop." Mrs. Patterson's voice was sharp. "You stop that right now. You didn't do anything wrong. You loved that boy with everything you had. You sacrificed your whole life for him, but maybe that was the problem. Maybe I sacrificed too much. Maybe I made him feel guilty." Mrs. Patterson leaned forward. "Honey, listen to me. I raised 4 children. Sometimes they disappointed me. Sometimes they made choices I didn't like. But not one of them would ever do something this cruel. This isn't about you being an imperfect mother. This is about him being a broken person." Her words should have been comforting, but they only made the pain worse. Because if Daniel was broken, wasn't I partly responsible for that too? Hadn't I failed to teach him basic human decency? "That girl," Mrs. Patterson continued, "Victoria, she's behind this, isn't she?" I thought about all the subtle changes in Daniel after Victoria entered his life. The way he started criticizing our apartment, my clothes, my job. The way he began talking about improving himself and moving up in the world. The way he stopped asking about my day or my health. "She's from money," I said. "Her family has everything Daniel never had growing up. I think she made him ashamed of where he came from. And instead of standing up to her, he chose to turn on you." The truth of that hit me like a physical blow. Daniel hadn't just been passively influenced by Victoria. He had made a choice. When forced to pick between the woman who had given him everything and the woman who offered him social status, he had chosen status. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called in sick to work and spent the entire evening going through photo albums and boxes of memories, not torturing myself this time, but looking for clues I might have missed, patterns I should have seen. I found them. There was Daniel at age 16. Embarrassed when I showed up to his school play in my waitress uniform because I had come straight from work. I had thought he was just being a typical teenager, but now I wondered if that was the beginning. There was Daniel at 18, angry when I couldn't afford to buy him a car like some of his classmates had. He had gotten over it, or so I thought, but maybe the resentment had been building all along. There was Daniel in college, increasingly reluctant to bring friends home, always meeting them at restaurants or their places instead. When I asked about it, he said our apartment was too small, too inconvenient. I had believed him. The signs had been there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. The next morning, I called the diner and told Sandra I wouldn't be coming in for a few days. I needed time to think, to figure out what came next. For 25 years, my entire identity had been built around being Daniel's mother. Now I had to figure out who Margaret Thompson was when she wasn't defined by someone else's needs. I started with small things. I rearranged the furniture in my living room, putting my reading chair by the window where the light was better. I had kept it in the corner for years because Daniel said it blocked the flow of the room when he visited. I bought groceries I actually wanted to eat, instead of keeping the refrigerator stocked with Daniel's favorites for his increasingly rare visits. On the 7th day after graduation, the phone rang. My heart still jumped when I saw Daniel's name on the caller ID, but this time there was wariness mixed with hope. "Mom?" His voice sounded strange, uncertain. "Hello, Daniel. We need to talk." "Do we?" I kept my voice neutral, though my hands were shaking. "Can I come over? Tonight?" Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, to welcome him back with open arms and pretend the graduation had never happened. But a stronger part, a part I was just discovering, said something different. "I don't think that's a good idea right now." There was a long pause. "Mom, please. I need to see you. You made yourself very clear about what you need from me at your graduation, Daniel." Another pause, longer this time. "I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why you would give your mother a tiny coffin and tell her you'd be happier if she were dead?" I'd love to hear that explanation. His breathing was audible through the phone. "It wasn't. I didn't mean." "You didn't mean what? You accidentally had a miniature coffin carved? You accidentally wrote that note? You accidentally decided to humiliate me in front of hundreds of people?" Victoria said. He started, then stopped. Victoria said what, Daniel? She said I needed to make a clean break, that I couldn't move forward in my career with baggage from my past. Baggage. That's what I was to him now. 25 years of love and sacrifice reduced to baggage. I see, I said quietly, but I've been thinking about everything, and I realize I handled it wrong. I want to make things right. What changed your mind? Another long pause. Things with Victoria. They're complicated right now. Something cold settled in my stomach. What kind of complicated? Can we please talk in person? I need to see you, Mom. I need your help. And there it was. He needed my help. Not my forgiveness. Not my love. Not even my understanding. My help. What do you need help with, Daniel? I can't talk about it over the phone. Please, Mom. I know I hurt you and I'm sorry, but I'm your son, and I need you right now. I looked across the room at the wooden box still sitting on my coffee table. 7 days ago, he had wished me dead. Now he needed me. I'll think about it, I said. What do you mean, you'll think about it? The entitlement in his voice was jarring. Even after what he had done, he expected me to drop everything and rush to his aid. I mean, I need time to decide if I want to see you right now. But I'm your son. Yes, you are. And sons don't usually tell their mothers they'd be happier if they were dead. The silence stretched between us. Finally, Daniel spoke, and his voice was smaller, more like the little boy I remembered. I messed up, Mom. I messed up really badly. Yes, you did. I don't know how to fix this. Neither do I, Daniel. Neither do I. I didn't sleep that night. Daniel's phone call had stirred up emotions I thought I had been getting under control. The desperation in his voice, the way he had said, I need you. It reminded me of when he was small and would run to me with scraped knees or hurt feelings. But he wasn't small anymore, and the hurt he was dealing with now was something he had brought on himself. The next morning, I was sitting at my kitchen table with coffee and toast when the phone rang again. It was barely 8 o'clock, too early for Daniel to be calling unless something was seriously wrong. My heart started pounding before I even looked at the caller ID. It was him. Mom? His voice was different this time, shaky, almost panicked. Daniel, what's wrong? Can you come over, please? I really need you right now. What happened? There was a long pause, filled with what sounded like shuddering breaths. Victoria's gone. I should have felt vindicated. I should have been happy that the woman who had poisoned my son against me was out of the picture. Instead, I just felt tired. Gone where? She left me. Last night, she took everything and left. I could hear him crying now, really crying, not just the controlled emotion he had shown on the phone the night before. Daniel, slow down. Tell me what happened. She was using me, Mom, the whole time. She was using me, and I was too stupid to see it. My maternal instincts kicked in despite everything. No matter what he had done to me, he was still my son, and he was in pain. Where are you right now? I'm at the apartment. Our apartment. But it's not our apartment anymore because she took everything. All the furniture, all the money from our joint account, everything. What do you mean, all the money? The signing bonus from the hospital where I was supposed to start working, $30,000. I put it in our joint account because we were talking about getting married. She cleaned it out. I closed my eyes. $30,000. More money than I made in a year and a half at the diner. Daniel, I'm coming over. Really? You don't have to. I know I don't deserve. Give me your address. I'll be there in an hour. The drive to Daniel's apartment gave me time to think. Part of me knew I was making a mistake, that I was falling back into old patterns of rescuing him from the consequences of his choices, but a larger part of me couldn't ignore the fact that my son was alone and hurting, regardless of how we had gotten to this point. The apartment building was in an expensive part of town, the kind of place I could never afford. Even in my pain and anger, I felt a flicker of pride that Daniel had made it far enough to live somewhere like this. Then I remembered that he had only been able to afford it because of Victoria's family money. I took the elevator to the 8th floor and found his door. Before I could knock, it opened. Daniel stood there, and I barely recognized him. His hair was disheveled, his eyes red and swollen from crying, and he was wearing the same clothes he had probably slept in. But what struck me most was how young he looked, like the little boy I remembered, not the cold stranger who had given me a coffin. "Mom," he said, and his voice broke on the word. I stepped into the apartment and gasped. It was completely empty except for a few pieces of obviously cheap furniture, a card table, 2 folding chairs, and an air mattress on the floor of what must have been the bedroom. "She took everything," Daniel said, following my gaze. "The couch, the dining room set, the bed, the TV, the dishes, everything. She said it all belonged to her family anyway, that they had paid for it." I walked through the empty rooms, trying to process what I was seeing. The apartment was spacious and elegant, with hardwood floors and large windows overlooking the city, but it felt hollow, like a beautiful shell with nothing inside. "How long were you together?" I asked. 3 years. We met during my 2nd year of med school. He sat heavily in one of the folding chairs. "I thought she loved me, Mom. I really thought we were going to get married and have a family together. What changed? Why did she leave now?" Daniel looked down at his hands. "She found out the truth about my family, about you, about where I really came from." I felt a chill run through me. "What do you mean?" "I lied to her, Mom, from the beginning. I told her my father was a businessman who died when I was young and left us comfortable. I said you were a teacher who retired early. I made up this whole story about our family having money, about me inheriting trust funds that would become available when I graduated. The pieces were starting to fit together, creating a picture that made me sick to my stomach. She was with you because she thought you had money? Her parents are wealthy, but they're also very controlling about their money. Victoria was counting on marrying someone who could support the lifestyle she's used to without her having to depend on them." He looked up at me with tears streaming down his face. "She was never interested in me, Mom. She was interested in what she thought I could give her." "How did she find out the truth?" Daniel's face crumpled. "Her father did a background check on me. He was going to welcome me into the family business, maybe make me a partner in his practice eventually. But when he investigated my background, he found out about the diner, about our apartment, about how you've been working 3 jobs to put me through school." I sat down in the other folding chair, my legs suddenly weak. "And when Victoria found out, she was furious. She said I had made her look like a fool, that she had been bragging to her friends about her future husband's family money. She said I was a fraud and a liar, that I came from trash, and I would always be trash no matter how many degrees I had." The words hit me like physical blows. Not because they hurt me. I had heard worse from people who thought they were better than me, but because I could see how much they had devastated Daniel. "She said other things too," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "About you. About how pathetic it was that a grown man was still being supported by his mother. About how embarrassing it would be to introduce you to her friends." "And what did you say?" Daniel's silence was answer enough. "You agreed with her," I said quietly. I was angry and hurt and confused. She was the first woman who had ever paid attention to me, who made me feel like I was special. When she started talking about how I needed to cut ties with my past to move forward, it seemed like maybe she was right. "So you decided to humiliate me at your graduation." She said I needed to make a clean break, that I couldn't start my new life while I was still weighed down by reminders of where I came from. She thought if I was cruel enough, you would get the message and stay away on your own. I stared at my son, trying to reconcile the person sitting in front of me with the little boy who used to bring me dandelions and tell me I was the best mom in the world. And the coffin? Victoria's idea. She said it would be symbolic, that I was burying my past to make room for my future. She had it made by some artist friend of hers. His voice was thick with self-loathing. I thought it was too cruel, but she convinced me that sometimes you have to be harsh to be kind, that you would be better off without having to worry about me anymore. I felt nauseous. The calculated cruelty of it was almost worse than if it had been done in a moment of anger. "So, what happened last night? Why did she leave?" Her father told her he wouldn't have anything to do with me now that he knew the truth about my background. No partnership, no welcome into the family, nothing. Without that, I was useless to her. Daniel wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "She told me she had never loved me, that she had been pretending the whole time because she thought I was her ticket to financial security without having to depend on her parents. And then she took the money and left." She said I had lied to her, so she didn't owe me anything. She said I should go back to my trashy mother and my trashy life because that's where I belonged. I looked around the empty apartment again. 3 years of Daniel's life, reduced to nothing in a single night. Where will you go? I asked. I don't know. The lease is in her name, so I probably have to be out by the end of the week. And without that signing bonus, I don't have money for a deposit on a new place. He looked at me with desperate eyes. I was hoping. I was wondering if maybe I could stay with you for a while, just until I get back on my feet. There it was. The request I had been expecting, the reason for this dramatic change in attitude. Daniel needed something from me, so suddenly I was worth talking to again. You want to move in with your trashy mother? The words came out harsher than I intended. I deserve that, he said quietly. I deserve worse than that, Mom. I know I can never undo what I did to you. I know there's probably no way you can ever forgive me. But I don't have anywhere else to go. Looking at him sitting there in that empty apartment, broken and alone, I felt the familiar pull of maternal instinct. This was my baby, my child, regardless of what he had done to me. But I also felt something new, a sense of my own worth that hadn't been there before. Daniel, I said carefully, do you understand what you did to me? I hurt you. I know that. You didn't just hurt me. You tried to erase me. You took everything I had given you, every sacrifice I had made, and you threw it away for a woman who was using you. He nodded miserably, and now that she's gone, now that you need help again, suddenly I'm worth talking to. It's not like that, Mom, isn't it? If Victoria hadn't left you, would you have called me? Would you ever have apologized for that coffin? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he shook his head. Probably not, he admitted. At least he was being honest. I sat in that empty apartment for another hour, watching my son alternate between genuine remorse and desperate pleading. Part of me wanted to wrap him in my arms and take him home, to pretend the last week had never happened. But every time I felt myself softening, I remembered the weight of that tiny coffin in my hands, the coldness in his eyes as he watched me read his cruel note. I need some time to think about this, I finally said, standing up from the folding chair. Think about what? Daniel's voice was panicked. Mom, I have nowhere else to go. I've burned every other bridge I had. And whose fault is that? He flinched as if I had slapped him. Mine. I know it's mine. But please, you're all I have left. I was all you had before too, Daniel. That didn't stop you from trying to throw me away. I walked toward the door, needing to get out of that hollow apartment before I made a decision based on pity instead of wisdom. Where are you going? He called after me. Home. To think. When will I hear from you? I turned back to look at him one more time. He looked so broken, so lost. But I had to keep reminding myself that his brokenness was self-inflicted. I don't know. The drive home was torture. Every maternal instinct I possessed was screaming at me to turn around, to rescue my child from the consequences of his choices. But a stronger voice, one I was still learning to listen to, kept reminding me that Daniel was 28 years old, a grown man who had made his own decisions. Back in my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table and tried to make sense of everything I had learned. Victoria had never loved Daniel. She had been using him for money she thought he had. Daniel had lied about our family, about me, about everything that had shaped him into the man he was. And when the lies unraveled, Victoria had taken everything and left him with nothing. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt like justice had been served. Instead, I just felt empty. Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door around dinner time. She took one look at my face and shook her head. He called you. He did more than call. I went to see him. Margaret, please tell me you didn't take him back without making him work for it. I told her everything. About Victoria leaving. About the money being stolen. About Daniel's admission that he would never have apologized if he hadn't needed my help. Mrs. Patterson listened without interrupting, her expression growing grimmer with each detail. That boy, she said when I finished, has some hard lessons to learn. He's learned them already. Victoria taught him exactly what his lies were worth. No, honey, he's learned that lying has consequences. He hasn't learned that love isn't conditional. That you don't throw away the people who matter just because you're ashamed of them. She was right. and I knew it. Daniel was sorry he had gotten caught. Sorry his plan had backfired. Sorry he was alone and broke. But was he actually sorry for what he had done to me? "What do you think I should do?" I asked. Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a long moment. "I think," she said finally, "that you need to decide what Margaret Thompson is worth. Not Margaret the mother, not Margaret the provider, not Margaret the rescuer, just Margaret." That night, I did something I hadn't done in 25 years. I made a list of what I wanted for myself, not what Daniel needed, not what would be best for him, but what I wanted for my own life. I wanted to be valued, not just needed. I wanted to be respected, not just tolerated. I wanted to be chosen because someone loved me, not because they had run out of other options. I wanted to matter to someone even when they didn't need anything from me. Looking at that list, I realized that Daniel had never given me any of those things. Even as a child, I had been the provider, the problem solver, the one who made everything better. He had never learned to value me as a person instead of just a resource. The next morning, Daniel called again. "Mom, I've been thinking all night about what you said. You're right. I didn't just hurt you. I tried to erase you, and that was unforgivable." "Yes, it was. But I want to make it right. I want to prove to you that I can be the son you deserve to have." "How do you plan to do that?" "I don't know yet, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." I took a deep breath. "Daniel, if you're serious about making things right, then you need to understand something. I'm not the same person I was 2 weeks ago. I'm not going to drop everything to rescue you anymore." "What does that mean?" "It means that if you want a relationship with me, you're going to have to earn it. And you're going to have to solve your own problems while you do it." There was a long pause. "I don't understand." "You have a medical degree, Daniel. You're supposed to start work at the hospital next month. You're a grown man with skills and education. Figure out your own housing situation. But I don't have any money for a deposit or first month's rent. Then get a job that pays immediately. Wait tables, deliver pizzas, do whatever you have to do until your hospital job starts." "You want me to wait tables?" The horror in his voice was almost comical. "I waited tables for 25 years to put you through school. Yes, I want you to wait tables if that's what it takes to pay your bills. But people might see me, people from the hospital or from medical school." And there it was, the same shame that had driven him to humiliate me in the first place. "Daniel, are you ashamed of honest work?" "No, of course not. It's complicated." "It's not complicated at all. Either you're willing to do what it takes to support yourself, or you're not. Either you understand that there's dignity in all honest work, or you don't. This is different, Mom. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, the image I have to maintain." "The image you have to maintain?" I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. "The image that was so important you had to pretend I didn't exist?" "That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. You're still ashamed, Daniel. You're still more worried about what people think than about doing the right thing. That's not fair." "You know what's not fair? Working 3 jobs for 25 years to put your child through school, only to have him tell you he'd be happier if you were dead." The line went quiet. "If you want to rebuild our relationship," I continued, "you're going to have to start by rebuilding yourself. And you're going to have to do it without my money, without my apartment, and without me cleaning up your messes. So you're abandoning me too." "No, Daniel. I'm giving you the chance to become someone worth knowing. Someone who values the people who love him. Someone who isn't ashamed of where he comes from. And if I can't do it, if I fail, then you fail. But at least you'll fail as yourself, not as some fake version of yourself designed to impress people who don't matter." After I hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment and waited to feel guilty about being so hard on him. But the guilt didn't come. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, a sense of my own power, my own worth. For the first time in 25 years, I wasn't defining myself by what Daniel needed from me. I was asking what I needed from him. Over the next week, Daniel called several times. Sometimes he was angry, accusing me of abandoning him when he needed me most. Sometimes he was pleading, promising he would change if I would just help him this once, but I held firm. Mrs. Patterson checked on me daily, making sure I wasn't wavering in my resolve. "It's hard," I told her on day 5. "Every instinct I have tells me to help him, Those instincts kept him from growing up, she said gently. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone face the consequences of their choices. On day 8, Sandra from the diner called. Margaret, there's a young man here asking about you. Says he's your son. He wants to know if we're hiring. My heart jumped. What did you tell him? I told him we always need good people. But he'd have to start as a busboy and work his way up like everyone else. He didn't look too happy about that, but he filled out an application. For the first time since graduation day, I smiled. 2 days later, Daniel called again. This time his voice was different, tired but not desperate. I got a job, he said. At the diner? Yeah. Sandra said you didn't ask her to hire me, that you told her I had to earn it on my own. That's right. I've been busying tables for 2 days. My back hurts, my feet hurt, and I smell like grease. But I made $43 in tips yesterday. How does it feel? There was a long pause. Humbling, he said finally. The other servers have been really kind to me. Even though they know I'm just passing through until my real job starts, they don't care that I have a medical degree. They just care that I show up and do my share of the work. Sounds familiar. Yeah, it sounds like how you lived your whole life. I felt tears prick my eyes, but I kept my voice steady. What else? I found a room to rent. It's not much, just a bedroom in an older woman's house. But it's clean and safe, Mrs. Rodriguez says I can stay as long as I need to, as long as I pay my rent on time and help with yard work on weekends. That's good, Daniel. Mom, I need to tell you something. These past 10 days, living like this, working like this, it's the first time in my adult life that I've had to take care of myself completely. And I keep thinking about you doing this for 25 years, not just for yourself, but for me too. I waited. I don't think I ever understood what you sacrificed for me. Not really. I knew intellectually that you worked hard, but I didn't understand what it felt like to be tired all the time, to worry about money, to wonder if you're going to be able to pay all your bills. And now you do. Now I'm starting to. And I'm ashamed of how I treated you. Not just at graduation, but for years before that. I took everything you gave me and acted like it was owed to me. These were the words I had been waiting to hear. But they came with a bittersweet recognition that it had taken losing everything for him to find them. What do you want from me now, Daniel? I want to earn your forgiveness. I want to prove that I can be the son you deserve to have all along. And I want to start by asking you to have dinner with me tomorrow night. Where? At the diner. After my shift ends. I thought maybe you could see where I work now. Meet the people who've been so good to me. If you want to. For the first time since graduation, I heard genuine humility in his voice. No entitlement, no assumptions. Just a simple request from a son to his mother. I'd like that, I said. I arrived at the diner 20 minutes before Daniel's shift ended, wanting to observe him without him knowing I was there. Sandra seated me in a corner booth where I could watch him work without being obvious about it. What I saw surprised me. Daniel was clearing tables with the same thoroughness I had always brought to my work. His expensive clothes had been replaced with the standard black pants and white shirt that all the staff wore. His hair, usually perfectly styled, was disheveled from the heat of the kitchen. But what struck me most was his attitude. He wasn't performing the work grudgingly or with obvious distaste. He was focused, efficient, and when one of the older servers asked him to help lift a heavy tray, he did it without hesitation or complaint. When a customer's child knocked over a water glass, Daniel was there immediately with a towel and a smile, reassuring the embarrassed mother that accidents happen. This wasn't the entitled young man who had handed me a coffin 3 weeks ago. This wasn't even the broken, desperate person I had found in that empty apartment. This was someone I didn't recognize, someone who was working without resentment, without shame, without the need to prove he was better than the job he was doing. He's a good worker, Sandra said, sliding into the booth across from me. Quiet, respectful, never complains. The other staff like him. I can see that. He talks about you sometimes. Not in a gossipy way, just. He's proud of you, Margaret. He tells people his mother worked here for 20 years, raised him by herself, put him through medical school. There's no shame in his voice when he talks about it. I watched Daniel finish cleaning his last table and head to the back to clock out. The transformation was remarkable, but I needed to be careful not to read too much into it. People could change their behavior without changing their hearts. A few minutes later, Daniel appeared at my table, looking nervous, but hopeful. He had changed out of his work shirt into a simple sweater that I recognized from his high school days. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Daniel. How was your shift?" "Good. Tiring, but good." He sat down across from me, and I could see the genuine exhaustion in his face. "I ordered us coffee and pie. Apple pie. Your favorite." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us trying to navigate this new territory. He looked different somehow, younger but also more mature. The arrogance that had marked his features for the past few years was gone, replaced by something softer. "How are you liking the job?" I asked. "More than I expected to," he admitted. "I thought I'd hate it, thought it would be beneath me. But the people here are good, Mom. They work hard. They look out for each other. They don't judge anyone for how they make their living. That's how I always found it." "I know. I never understood that before." The waitress brought our coffee and pie. It was Jenny, a girl who had started working at the diner about 5 years ago. She was studying nursing at the community college, working full-time to pay her tuition. "Your son's been a real help this week, Mrs. Thompson," she said with a genuine smile. "Yesterday he stayed late to help me with a difficult table, and he wouldn't take any of the tip even though he earned it." After she left, I studied Daniel's face. "Why didn't you take the tip?" "She needed it more than I did. She's got kids at home and tuition to pay. I'm just working here temporarily." "But you earned it." "Yeah, but she's been doing this job a lot longer than I have, and she was the one who handled the difficult customers. I just helped clear their table." He stirred sugar into his coffee. "Besides, I'm starting to understand that not everything is about what you can get for yourself." We talked for 2 hours that night. Daniel told me about his co-workers, about Mrs. Rodriguez who was renting him the room, about how different his perspective on work had become. He asked about my life, about Mrs. Patterson, about things that had nothing to do with what I could do for him. For the first time in years, we were talking as two adults who cared about each other, not as a provider and a dependent. "I start at the hospital next week," Daniel said as we prepared to leave. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," he admitted, but also excited. "And Mom, I want you to know that I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not anymore. When people ask about my family, I'm going to tell them the truth, that my mother worked 3 jobs to put me through school, that she's the strongest person I know, that I'm proud to be her son." I felt tears prick my eyes. "That means more to me than you know." "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. For a moment I tensed, remembering the last gift he had given me, but what he pulled out wasn't a box, it was an envelope, slightly worn around the edges. "What is it?" "Open it." Inside was a check for $300 and a letter written on notebook paper. "Daniel, I can't take your money. Please, just read the letter first." I unfolded the paper and began to read. "Mom, I know $300 isn't much compared to everything you've given me over the years, but it's every penny I've earned since I started working at the diner. I want you to have it. Not because you need it or because I owe it to you, though I do, but because I want to give you something for the first time in my life instead of just taking from you. I've been thinking about that coffin I gave you, and I realize now that it wasn't just cruel. It was the ultimate symbol of everything that was wrong with me. I was so desperate to bury my past that I was willing to bury the person who loved me most. But I don't want to bury my past anymore, Mom. I want to honor it. I want to honor you. You didn't just raise me. You showed me every day what real strength looks like, what real love looks like, what it means to sacrifice for someone else without expecting anything in return. I can never undo what I did at graduation. I can never take back that coffin or that terrible note, but I can spend the rest of my life trying to become the man you raised me to be instead of the man I thought I needed to be to impress people who didn't matter. I love you, Mom, not because I need something from you, not because you're useful to me, but because you're you, because you're my mother, and you're the best person I know, Daniel." I read the letter twice, tears streaming down my face. This wasn't the polished, calculated language Daniel usually used. These were raw, honest words from someone who had finally learned the difference between love and need. "Keep the money," I said, handing the check back to him. "But keep the letter too. Read it whenever you're tempted to be someone you're not." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. You're going to need that money for your new apartment. And besides, the letter is worth more to me than any amount of money could be. Over the following months, Daniel and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, carefully. He kept his job at the diner even after starting at the hospital, working one shift a week because, as he told me, it kept him grounded. He moved into a modest apartment that he could afford on his own salary. When I offered to help him buy furniture, he declined, saying he wanted to earn everything himself. His apartment was simple, furnished mostly with items from thrift stores and garage sales, but he seemed proud of it in a way he had never been proud of the expensive apartment Victoria had filled with her family's money. Mrs. Patterson was initially skeptical of Daniel's transformation, but she warmed to him gradually as she saw the consistency of his changed behavior. "He's not the same person who gave you that coffin," she admitted to me 6 months later. "That boy was broken. This one is healing." The biggest test came 8 months after graduation when Daniel called to tell me he had run into Victoria at a medical conference. "She looked exactly the same," he said. "Beautiful, expensive clothes, perfect makeup. She tried to talk to me, said she missed what we had." "What did you tell her?" "I told her the truth, that what we had was built on lies, that I wasn't the person she thought I was marrying, and that I wasn't interested in pretending to be someone else ever again." How did she react? She laughed. She said I was fooling myself if I thought I could go back to being poor and common, that I'd get tired of playing at being humble. And I realized that she still didn't understand. She thought I was performing humility the same way I used to perform sophistication. She couldn't imagine that someone might actually want to live authentically instead of impressively. A year after graduation, Daniel was established in his career and had started dating a nurse from the hospital named Sarah. She was kind, hardworking, and came from a background similar to his own. When he brought her to meet me, she shook my hand warmly and said, "Daniel talks about you all the time. He says you're his hero." I looked at my son, standing there with this lovely woman who saw him for who he really was, and felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with his success or status. It had to do with his character, with the man he had chosen to become. On the first anniversary of his graduation, Daniel showed up at my apartment with a small wrapped box. My heart skipped a beat, but when I opened it, I found something beautiful. A small wooden jewelry box with, "To the best mother in the world," engraved on the top. Inside was a simple gold chain with a pendant shaped like a heart. "I wanted to replace the last gift I gave you with something that actually represents how I feel about you," he said. "Something you can keep forever without it causing you pain." I put on the necklace and hugged my son, feeling the weight of genuine love instead of calculated cruelty. That night, I took the tiny coffin out of the drawer where I had kept it for over a year. For months, I had been unable to throw it away, unable to look at it, unable to decide what to do with it. Now, I knew. I took it outside to the small garden behind my apartment building and buried it under the rosebush I had planted the previous spring. As I covered it with earth, I felt like I was burying more than just a wooden box. I was burying the version of myself that had defined her worth by how much she could sacrifice for others. The roses bloomed beautifully that summer, and whenever I tended them, I thought about how sometimes things have to be buried in order for new life to grow. Daniel and I have dinner together every Sunday now. Not because he needs anything from me, not because I'm rescuing him from some crisis, but because we enjoy each other's company. He tells me about his patients, his relationship with Sarah, his plans for the future. I tell him about my life at the diner, about Mrs. Patterson's latest adventures, about the books I'm reading now that I have time for myself. Our relationship isn't the same as it was when he was a child. It's better. It's built on mutual respect instead of dependence, on love instead of obligation, on choice instead of necessity. Last week, Sarah showed me her engagement ring. A simple, elegant band that Daniel had saved up for over 6 months to buy. They're planning a small wedding, and Daniel has asked me to help Sarah's mother plan it. "I want you to be involved in everything," he told me. "You're not just my mother. You're going to be Sarah's family too." As I write this, I can see that wooden jewelry box sitting on my dresser, catching the afternoon light. Next to it is a photo from Sarah and Daniel's engagement party. A picture of all of us together, laughing and happy. Sometimes I think about that graduation day, about the woman I was then and the woman I am now. The Margaret who walked into that auditorium was defined entirely by her son's needs, by her own capacity for sacrifice, by how much she could give up for love. The Margaret who exists now knows that real love doesn't require you to erase yourself. It doesn't demand that you accept cruelty in silence, or that you rescue people from the consequences of their choices. Real love sometimes means stepping back and letting the people you care about learn to be worthy of the love they're given. My son learned that lesson the hard way, but he learned it. And in teaching him, I learned something too, that I was worth more than I had ever believed, that I deserved better than I had ever demanded, and that it's never too late to remember who you are underneath all the roles you play for other people. The tiny coffin is buried and forgotten, but the love that survived it is stronger than ever. Sometimes the most beautiful flowers grow in the places where we've buried our deepest pain.